Hi, how are you doing? Welcome back to ELT Gallery. In this video, we are going to talk about predicate. Now, let's start. We have 5 topics to talk about predicate. The first is definition. The second is predicate verbs. The third is finite and non-finite verbs. The fourth is auxiliary verb. And finally, we'll talk about verb combination. Now, let's start with the definition of a predicate. A predicate is a sentence element which shows what the subject does or undergoes, how the subject is, or what the subject is like. We have the examples here. Maggie waters the flowers regularly. Here we have waters as the predicate of the sentence. This predicate, this verb waters here, shows what the subject does. It shows what Maggie does. She waters the flowers regularly. The faucet still leaks. Here the predicate is leaks. It shows what happens to the subject or what the subject undergoes. The faucet still leaks. What happens to the faucet? It still leaks. It's a process. It's a process which the faucet undergoes. In the last example, it shows how the method was. It was difficult. In a sentence, we may have one or more verbs. We have a sentence, Tom painted the house. Here we only have one verb, painted. In the second example, Mrs. Arum will present a paper at 2. We have 2 verbs. The verb is will, and the second is present. Mrs. Arum will present the paper at 2. And then in the last example, in the third example, Bobby doesn't want to see the movie. Here we have 2 verbs, does and want. To see here is not part of the predicate. It's the object of want. Bobby doesn't want to see the movie. When a predicate contains more than one verb, the main verb is the last in the predicate phrase. So if we have more than one verb in a sentence, the main verb is always the last. Painted here, we only have one verb, so painted is a main verb. Will present, the main verb is present, and doesn't want, the main verb is want. Now let us see what kind of verbs occur in a predicate. We have painted and Tom painted the house, and we have will in Mrs. Arum will present paper at 2, and we have does in Bobby does not want to see the frame. The verb painted, will, and does here limit the time frame. If you have painted, the time frame is past, so the action is in the past. Mrs. Arum will present the paper at 2. The time frame here with the verb will is present, it's present future. And in the third example, Bobby doesn't want to see the movie. Does here shows the time frame, namely it's in the present. The state of not wanting to see the movie is in the present. Such a verb is called finite verb. Finite means limit. So here the verb painted, will, and does here limiting the time frame. Painted in the past, it limits the time frame. It belongs in the past. Will here is present. It limits the frame, the time frame into present, and also does here. So we have a finite verb. A finite verb is a verb which limits the time frame or which sets the time frame of the action, state, or process. So once again, a finite verb is a verb which limits the time frame of the action or process or state in a sentence. Now let's have the definition of a finite verb. A finite verb is a verb which sets the time frame of the action or state. In English, the finite verb is the first verb in the predicate. So if we have 2 verbs or 3 verbs, the finite verb is always the first. And the other verbs are called non-finite verbs. They don't limit, they do not contribute in the limitation of the time frame. Now let's see the examples again. Tom painted the house. Here we only have one verb, painted, and it keeps the time frame the action was in the past. Mrs. Aram will present a paper at 2. Will here is a finite verb and present is non-finite verb. The finite verb will here limits the time or sets a time frame. It's in the present. Bobby doesn't want to see the movie. Here we have does, the finite verb, and want, the non-finite verb. The verb does here sets a time frame. It's in the present. The state of not wanting to see the movie is in the present. Now let's see the characteristics of a finite verb. We take Bobby doesn't want to see the movie as an example. The finite verb here is does. So a finite verb is the first verb in the predicate. We have does and want. The finite verb is does. And then if we have a finite verb, the finite verb changes its form when the tense is changed. Bobby doesn't want to see the movie is in the present. If we change the tense into past, then we have Bobby didn't want to see the movie. So the second characteristics of a finite verb is that it changes its form when the tense is changed from present to past or from past to present. And then the third characteristics of a finite verb is that it changes the form when the subject is changed from singular to plural, or from plural to singular when we have a present tense. Bobby doesn't want to see the movie here. We have does because Bobby is a singular third person. If we have a plural subject, for example, they, we don't say Bob. If we have they, a plural subject, then we do not say they doesn't, but we say they don't want to see the movie. So the third characteristics of a finite verb is that it changes the form when the subject is changed from singular to plural or vice versa in present tense. A predicate may consist of a single verb, main or full, or more than one verb. So if we have more than one verb in a sentence, in a predicate, the main verb or the full verb is the last verb, and the other verbs are auxiliary verbs. Now, what is an auxiliary verb? An auxiliary verb is a verb which functions to add more meaning to the verbs. With an auxiliary verb, a speaker adds more meaning to the predicate. It's not just the main verb or the full verb, but here we have other meanings. English has 4 kinds of verbs. The first is status, the second is aspect, the third is voice, and the fourth is modal or modals. Now let's see what a status verb. A status auxiliary verb is a verb which functions to show the status of the action, process, or state which the main verb expresses. It shows whether it really happens or exists, it's positive, or it doesn't happen or it doesn't exist, or negative, or it's still a question. So the action, process, or state can really happen or exist. It may not happen, or it doesn't exist, or it doesn't happen, or it's still a question. So that's a function of status. It shows the status of the action, process, or state. English has one status auxiliary verb, namely do. Here we have do, does, and did. The status auxiliary verb is needed when the sentence does not have an auxiliary verb. If it has an auxiliary verb, then we just add not after the auxiliary verb. So we only need the status auxiliary verb do, does, and did when we don't have any auxiliary verb. Now let's see more examples. Here we have Larry swims well. This sentence, the time frame of this sentence is present. We have swims, it's present tense, and it shows that the action really happens. Larry swims well. It happens because of a habit. Larry has the habit of swimming. Larry doesn't swim well. So the swimming well does not occur or does not exist, or Larry does not have the ability, Larry does not swim well. Does Larry swim well? The action, whether Larry swim well or not, is still a question. In the next example, the students finish the test. Here, the finishing has really happened. The students didn't finish the test. Here, the finishing does not happen. So this is a negative, and the finishing action does not happen. Did the students finish the test? The finishing is still a question. So a status auxiliary verb shows whether the action or process really happens or does not exist. Now let's continue with the next auxiliary verb. We have aspect. English has two kinds of aspect, namely the perfective with have and the progressive with be. The perfective have is also often called perfect, and progressive be is also often called continuous. So we have two aspects in English, perfect and progressive, or perfect, perfective and progressive or continuous. Here we have a perfective aspect in the sentence. The students have finished the test. We have and we have the students here. The students have. If you only have one student, you say the student has. The students have finished the test. So the perfect aspect here is shown by the verb have and the ending ed or en after finish. Diana has written the book. Here, the writening here has completed. So perfect shows that the action is already completed. Then we have the progressive or continuous. We have Sinta is writing her new novel. Here we have is and ing, is and writing. It shows that the action is still in progress or progressive. It still continue. It still continues, or it's continual, or it continues. Mrs. Ahmad is teaching. The action is still in progress or is still going on. Mrs. Ahmad is teaching. The next kind of auxiliary verb is voice. English only has one voice auxiliary verb, namely be. It shows that the sentence is passive. Voice can be active or passive, but we don't have any auxiliary verb for the active. We don't have an auxiliary verb to show that the sentence is active. We only have one auxiliary verb be to show that the sentence is passive. Here we have three examples. The food is provided in the lobby. So it's provided here is passive. The book has been written. Here we have aspect has, perfect, and also passive been written. The house will be sold. Here we have be here and will be sold. Please note here that the form of be depends on the subject and also on the tense. We have the food is provided in the lobby. If we have the food and the drink, we have the food and the drink are provided. The book has been written. We have singular book. If we have plural, we say the book have been written. The house will be sold. Here, the forms of be, the auxiliary verb be here is also be because we have will before that. So the forms of be depends on the subject and the presence of any auxiliary verb before it. The first kind of auxiliary verb is modal or modals. A modal auxiliary verb shows the speaker's attitude towards the action, process, or state which the main verb expresses. So if we have a modal, it shows the attitude of the speaker. We have the example here, Diana can swim well. Swimming here is not really an action. Swimming here is not an action, but that's only the ability which Diana can perform. So if we have the sentence, Diana can swim, we do not really say Diana swims, but that's only the attitude of the speaker that Diana has the ability to swim. The students may go home now. We are not talking about the students really going home, but that's only a permission. That's the attitude of the speaker, that the students have the permission to go home. The class will break. Here in the class probably does not break, but here the speaker shows the attitude that the breaking will probably happen in the future. So a modal auxiliary verb shows the attitude of the speaker towards the action, process, or state which the predicate verb expresses. Now we come to the last topic. We have verb combination. We have known that in a sentence, in a predicate, we can have more than one verbs. We can have auxiliary verbs, and we can have auxiliary verbs, and there are four kinds of auxiliary verb, and we have the main verb, which is the last verb. The first combination is just an auxiliary verb and main verb. We have like the organization has renovated the museum. Here we have an aspect, auxiliary verb has, and the main verb is renovated. The museum was renovated in 2010. Here we have one auxiliary verb was and passive, and the verb renovated. The second kind of combination is we have a modal or aspect, passive, and main verb. We have the sentence. The museum should be renovated. We have the modal should, and we have the passive be, should be. And then the next example, the museum has been renovated. We have the aspect has, and after that we have been renovated. That's a passive. So the second combination is modal or aspect, passive, and main verb. In the third example, we have the museum is being renovated. The first is here is the progressive or continuous aspect. It's still being in the process. The museum is being renovated. And then the second B is for passive. So here we have aspect, passive, and main verb. And then the third we have modals, aspect, passive, and main verb. We have the example, the museum should be being renovated. We have should and be. Should is the modal, and be here, and the second be is the aspect, and the third is one the passive. The museum should have been renovated. We have modal should and aspect have and passive been. The museum should have been renovated. The fourth combination is perfect, progressive, and main verb. We have the organization has been renovating the museum. Has here is perfect and been is progressive, and we have informed because this is progressive. The last kind of combination is modal, perfect, progressive, and main verb. We have the example here. It should have been renovating the museum. It should have been renovating the museum. This sentence does not sound natural. I think we better say it should have renovated the museum, or the organization should have renovated the museum, but it hasn't. This is a summary of the predicate forms. The summary shows what the predicate verb should be after an auxiliary verb. If we have a sentence auxiliary verb, do, does, did, we need to have stem. If we have a perfect aspect, we have and stem plus en. The term for the verb plus ed after perfect is stem plus en because we have many verbs which end with en like broken, caven, shaken, and so on. So the form of the perfect is have, and then we have the stem plus en. And then the form for the continuous or progressive aspect is be and stem plus en. The form of the passive voice is be and stem plus en. And then if you have modals and a verb, the verb should be in the stem form. Well, that's all I'll talk about predicate. We have talked about the definition of predicate, finite and non-finite verb, auxiliary verb, and then the combinations of auxiliary verbs and verbs in a sentence. That's all. In the next video, I'm still going to talk about sentence element, and the topic is object. Object is the third element after predicate. See you in the next video.